mean, from what I understand, the research has been done at Olympic Dam, and it's never really been published anywhere. It's certainly possible. Like, I think the basic steps involved in getting rare earths to, from the ore, from sort of a hard rock type environment, is basically sulfuric acid leaching most commonly. You can use alkaline chemistry, it depends on the ore body and so on, but typically sulfuric acid is a preferred chemical because it's cheaper, it's more aggressive and it's faster. So typically that's used, which they already do at Olympic Dam, to get the copper out and to get some of the uranium out and so on. So there's a whole range of projects where we could possibly get rare earths out of already, but no one's really looked at that. It's, the industry has never really needed to look at it too much because the demand globally hasn't been there and the supply has been so cheap from China. It's just not economic for most people to do it. But the technology to get it out versus the economics, they're not the same argument, you know. And so they're often mixed up as if they're the same thing when they're not. Right. So, and I think one of the biggest problems that we have, and it's not just in rare earths, but it's in copper and gold, and all, you know, even coal and so on, is that we often, where products are used, is so disjoint from where the actual mining is done that the impacts are much heavier at the mining stage, whereas the manufacturing stage impacts a lot less. Right. The greater value is generally the manufacturing stage, of course. Right, which is why Japan and other countries are so concerned, and Europe, etc., are so concerned about their supplies because they want to make sure their manufacturing sectors are protected. Right, but we don't connect that to the impacts very well. Right, so when we're looking at different options for where can we get, you know, a reasonable supply of rare earths that are produced, say, ethically or reasonably, then yeah, we don't link that back. Now, I mean, that's a generic problem that we all face, and communities living in mining regions can do it too, you know, very easily. But the consumers, wherever they are, often are very disjoint. So it's a, I know that's probably a bit broader answer, but hopefully it helps.
Thanks, Gavin.
Is there any percentage of water, like they're taking all this water away, are they recycling any of it at all? Is there a percentage?
I don't know what the percent would be. One of the problems you get with a lot of these sorts of projects is sometimes you need a certain quality of water in order to make them work. If you're looking at steam, if you're looking at things, like when I've looked at the process description they put into the EIS, it looks like they're doing pretty much everything they can. But the basic nature of the project is that it's a very heavy water consumer. Right, so there's going to be a lot of water losses in train through steam and through having to deal with all the salts and so on as well. So exactly what the percentage would be, I'd have to go back to the EIS and look at it. But it looks like they're doing everything they can. Whether they can do more, you know, I'd have to study the EIS in more detail. But they're certainly looking at those options. But it is just the very nature of the ore body and the type of project that it's just it is a water consumer. It's a very heavy water consumer relative to other mines.
If it is, though, in the air have vapours of sulfuric acid and stuff like that in the air,
yeah, and there's, they've got pollution control, there's scrubbers and other systems they're proposing to build as part of the plant. A lot of those things are fairly standard in engineering now. Like if you look at whether it's our EPAs and things like that, one of the areas where we have been successful is actually getting pollution control into factories and getting the basic design. A lot of that is just built and designed, and so we often take a lot of that for granted, but it's there. Right, it's the same sense with our cars. We you know, one of the reasons that the great irony in Victoria, at least, the Latrobe Valley generally has better air quality than Melbourne. Right, and even though Melbourne we have much better air quality now than we used to, say 30 years ago, because we've got the pollution control in cars and in terms of catalytic converters. So there's a lot of that stuff built into it, and I think from what I've read of the EIS, that's fairly standard. If they build it, if they design it properly, build it properly, operate it properly. Always a lot of buts when it comes to engineering, but it's still got to be done. And you know, in a large part, we engineers are often pretty good at doing all of that, but sometimes we get it wrong. And that's
the issue with this one in the first place.
My understanding, not absolute where they're getting their water from, but it'll be a mix of water from the Macquarie, some groundwater, because it's not a big site by definition in terms of the actual footprint of it. In a mining sense, it's not like you've got Moranbah where you've got a 50-kilometre scar right through the landscape from drag lines. So it's small, which means the volume of water they get from runoff from rainfall is therefore small, so they have to import a lot of water. That import comes from groundwater and Macquarie River, but from my reading of the EIS, and Bev touched on this, they don't really have rock-solid plans on that. It's going to be a bit from everywhere.
So we'll worry about that later. And just about the scrubber, if I may, putting the scrubbers into the stack came after the fact, and as a result of some of the agencies and the concerns people had about the air quality. So they're now required to put the scrubbers in the stack.
That's what
I mean, I guess I've also got large concerns about the use of the water from essentially the Murray-Darling Basin, which is already lacking water for many years. I mean, who has some authority? Do people just suddenly have authority to pull out water? Don't they have to go through the Murray-Darling Basin Authority?
No, they use it as an open trading market in the Macquarie system for groundwater and surface water. And that's what the government is saying. Look, they just get out there and search around and finally offer enough money that someone will sell their irrigation licences to.
Okay, so they're not extracting more water than it's already
I think,
Okay.
The other part of the problem with that though is that what we often don't do is we're looking at this project alone. And so what we don't do very well is say, well, what's the entire catchment? Now, whether we're looking at just the Macquarie catchment or going even right out to Murray-Darling, or even just the Darling, let alone Murray-Darling, right, we often don't then look at the cumulative things that are adding up or put that in context, right? So it's not just whether it's 4 billion litres per year for this project, right? But actually, well, what is that going to be doing? Just not only just locally, or within the sort of immediate region where the water's coming from, either from purchased water from irrigators or groundwater or whatever, but also looking at how it all adds up with the other things that are going on in the catchment.
Yes.
Cumulative assessment, and that's something we do very, very badly generally in Australia.
Yes.
And not many places actually do it well, but it's something we know we need to do.
Yes.
Certainly the Hunter Valley is a classic case where mine by mine, and all of a sudden the community's feeling this much impact because each mine is added up, and all of a sudden the impact's this big. But the government's just looked at this one because that's that one mine, and so that's a key weakness in the way we deal with a lot of these things. And it's we know we should do it, and the problem is that's got to be led by government because a proponent can only manage their mine; they can't manage someone else's mine, right, or farmers or things like that. So government needs to make sure there's a process that looks at all of that. And although I remember last year when I was involved with the court case for the proposed Alpha coal mine, they were required. The guidelines said they were legally required to look at all known coal projects in the region, of which there's 7 or 8 mega projects, right? And they looked at 2 because they were the ones owned by Gina Rinehart, right? Now. And it's funny when you look at EISs, because some of the other proponents that are much less resourced than, say, that one was, they just said, well, we'll just assume that mine goes ahead and just drops the groundwater down here, right? There's ways to deal with that from an engineering point of view, to come up with scenarios and then run your groundwater models, your surface water models and other things, and start to say, well, if you put this mine, then that mine, then that mine, then that mine, and start dropping them all down, it's pretty easy from in concept to do it. There's still a lot of manual labour and hopefully some clever artistry that goes into that. In terms of getting the engineering right, or at least the error bars well enough constrained so you can understand what the risks are. But they still didn't do it. But we won that case, so it was rare, but we won that one, the court case. But anyway, that's another story.
If I just say though, the issue here in Macquarie, if we go into the next big millennium-style drought, the access of water that's available out of the dam gets very limited. Yep. So the security of what you access on doesn't matter what volume you've got in the licence, it's a matter of how much water's left in the dam.
Yes.
But what did happen, and particularly in the Lachlan, because the mines are so dependent on the water and there's the jobs and the royalties and all the rest of it, the mines tend to get a bit of a precedence for their water supply at the expense of everybody else. So what happened in the Lachlan, they stopped the water supply at Condobolin. Everyone downstream of Condobolin got no water. So, so the real issue around sharing water in the middle of a drought, when you've got mines owning large volumes of water, the sharing tips a fair bit. It's something that people really, need to...
There's got a factor with that as well. If you're looking at a cubic metre of water, 1,000 litres, the value of that to a miner is always more than the value of that to a farmer. Yes. So the miner can always pay more because the product that they can generate that economically is much, much greater than the value that a farmer can generate. And that's an inherent, conflict. Right? So, but also the other thing, I don't know whether this has actually been addressed in the EIS or not, it's a section they can look at, but have they really factored in climate change in terms of trends? We're looking at potentially changes in rainfall and therefore runoff and less groundwater recharge or whatever. So that's some of the things that need to be factored in. So,
Vic mentioned about that they haven't taken into account the blasts and the amount of radioactive emissions that might be generated by that. Have you got an idea of what that might be and how much concern you have us.
I mean, there's certainly in the appendix that deals with radiation, it's one I read through fairly carefully. There's certainly numbers in there for some of the radioactive emissions, but I can't remember whether they actually incorporate blastings. I have to double check that. But, yeah, I think that's right on that. But for a lot of things, I know they were looking at sort of general dust deposition in an area, and you've got some standard models that you can run from an engineering point of view. Often they can be very optimistic because you're taking some of the better criteria. Right, so there's ways to do that, but how much? Now I think if they get their dust management system right, they've got their water supply sufficiently sort of secure, there's a lot of ifs, then they should be able to manage their dust problems. Of course the question is, are they going to do that? Right, so now I don't know, for example, that locals here would know much better in terms of how well that stuff was done at Peak Hills, for example. Right, and so and the other thing in terms of looking at, say, rehabilitation success, is Peak Hill a good example of that? So when you're looking at some of these issues, I think Alkane's certainly got a history, and certainly down at Tomlingley, I suppose, where they're starting up, there should be actual operational sort of evidence that they can point to and say, yes, well, we do understand dust during blasting, and we can look at that. But I've never been to Peak Hill myself, in terms of the mine there. But that'd be worth doing to say, well, how good is the rehab there? How good, during operations, what do the community say about dust? I think that'd be a good thing to find out. I'm not sure if there's anyone here from Peak Hill, but that'd be the way I'd start to address that, at least to understand it more.
Who will be responsible for monitoring and checking they're doing the job, and that they're not putting a large population so close to this?
Yep, I think in New South Wales, typically the company would do most of the set up their monitoring stations. I don't know with air quality, and air quality is not something I normally deal with, but groundwater or surface water and other things, yes, but I don't know if EPA have their own sort of independent, air quality or dust monitoring. No.
They get a pollution licence for air and general water, particularly if there's going to be water discharge. This is supposed to be a nil discharge mine, but again, that will depend entirely on rainfall. That happened coal mine in there, nil discharge mine, until we got the highest rainfall in the state in December 2010, and 3 mines near me their pollution licences were turned off, so they could discharge raw mine water into the local creeks and rivers for up to 6 months. There's a whole lot of things. Once a mine's up and operating, that there's got to be things.
They claim force majeure.
Yeah.
So that's exceptional circumstances done.
Yep. And they built funds that didn't hold up properly on 1 in 10 year flood, which from an engineering point of view is kind of unbelievable. But
well, that's probably another issue with the placement of these upstream on the Macquarie River from Dubbo's drinking water supply.
Yeah.
So that's another concern I think everyone should be taking into account. Sorry, Anne,
I just wanted to ask, the wastewater can be reverse osmosis.